What would you do if the chance of a lifetime came with a price you weren't prepared to pay? Lucas, a struggling 23-year-old student, finds himself lured into a marriage that promises wealth beyond his wildest dreams. But what happens when the glittering facade starts to crumble? The truth is darker, more dangerous than he could have imagined. Stay tuned as the shocking revelations unfold. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Lucas sat in his cramped apartment, staring at the pile of overdue bills on the table. His life felt like an endless cycle of struggle. At 23, he had no clear direction, just a desperate need to make it out of the financial hole that seemed to get deeper every day. He had dreams, sure, but those seemed to belong to someone else. People with money, with connections, people who didn't have to work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. He wanted something better, but didn't know how to get it. One evening, after yet another grueling shift at a nearby coffee shop, Lucas met her. Rose, a woman in her early 80s, was sitting alone at a table by the window. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, studied him as he served her coffee. She wasn't his usual type, not by a long shot. Her pale skin and silver hair didn't carry the same energy as the women he was used to seeing on his walk to class, but there was something about her, something in the way she observed him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Are you a student?" she asked, her voice soft but commanding. "You don't seem like someone who works here." Lucas, a little startled, smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, I'm a student at UCLA, just working to pay the bills, you know?" Rose tilted her head, her lips curving into a mysterious smile. "What are you studying?" "Business," he said, hoping to impress her. "But right now, I'm just trying to get through it." She regarded him for a moment, then spoke again. "You're ambitious, I can see that. Ambition is a rare thing at your age." Lucas chuckled nervously. "I guess I don't have much of a choice." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "What if I told you I could help you change all that? Help you escape the grind? Would you be interested?" His heart raced. He had heard rumors of wealthy patrons offering young men like him opportunities, but he never thought it would happen to him. And yet, here it was, his chance at a life he'd only dreamed of. "I don't know what you mean," Lucas said, trying to mask his excitement with caution. "I can offer you a life of comfort, luxury. All you need to do is make one simple decision," Rose said, her eyes narrowing as she watched his reaction. That night, as he lay in bed, the weight of her words hung heavy in his mind. Could he trust her? Was this some kind of scam? But the more he thought about it, the more desperate he became. His student loans, the bills, the endless worry about his future. Rose's offer was an escape. For once, something good was within his reach. He had no family left to support, no reason to stay in his cramped apartment struggling every day. What harm could it do to at least hear her out? The next day, he called the number she had given him. The voice on the other end was calm, reassuring. They set a meeting for the next evening. When Lucas arrived at the address Rose had provided, he found himself at the gates of a sprawling estate in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods of Los Angeles. It was a far cry from the apartment he was used to. The mansion loomed before him like something out of a dream, with manicured lawns and expensive cars lining the driveway. Rose had wealth, that was undeniable, and now Lucas was about to enter her world. Rose greeted him at the door with the same calculating smile. "Welcome," she said, her tone inviting. "Come in." The inside of the house was everything Lucas had imagined, gleaming marble floors, high ceilings, and walls adorned with expensive art. But as he walked through the halls, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Rose's behavior was a little off. There was an intensity in her gaze, an edge to her voice that made him feel uneasy. Over the next few days, Lucas was swept into the whirlwind of luxury. Rose introduced him to her world. Private jets, 5-star restaurants, shopping sprees that left him breathless. He was living a life he had only seen in movies. But slowly, he began to notice things that didn't sit right with him. Rose treated everyone around her with cold indifference, including her own family. Her daughter Vanessa would come by occasionally, and the tension between them was palpable. Rose spoke about her with such disdain that it made Lucas uncomfortable. But the worst part was the way Rose spoke to him. At first, her compliments had seemed genuine, even affectionate, but it quickly became clear that she was using him as a pawn in some game. He was a tool to fulfill her needs, a decoration to add to her collection of possessions, and Lucas began to feel trapped. The first real sign of trouble came on the 7th day. Rose had asked him to dinner with some of her friends. The conversation was light at first, but when the subject of family came up, everything changed. Rose began to talk about her children in a way that sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. "They've always been ungrateful," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I gave them everything, but they never appreciated it. Now they come around like they need something from me. It's pathetic." Lucas felt his stomach turn. He wasn't sure if she was talking about her daughter or some other family member, but the bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and it was at that moment that he realized something. Rose wasn't just wealthy, she was deeply unhappy, and her wealth only seemed to amplify her cruelty. He excused himself from the dinner early, retreating to the guest room where he'd been staying. As he sat on the edge of the bed, his mind raced. What had he gotten himself into? The life he'd dreamed of was slipping away from him, replaced by a cold reality he wasn't prepared to face. The days ahead would only bring more questions, more doubts, and soon Lucas would realize that the perfect life he thought he was stepping into was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. He was trapped, but how long could he remain there before the truth came crashing down? For the next few days, Lucas felt as though he were walking through a dream, but it was one he couldn't quite wake up from. Every corner of the mansion held some new luxury he had never experienced, from the intricately decorated grand staircase to the breathtaking views of the city below. Rose, though cold and calculating, continued to shower him with attention, as though he were the most important person in her world. But there was something unsettling in her eyes, something that didn't sit well with him. She was always watching, always waiting. Her obsession with status was becoming more evident. On one occasion, they attended a charity gala together, where the rich and powerful of Los Angeles gathered, mingling like glittering statues. Rose introduced Lucas to several high-profile individuals, all of whom seemed to regard him with curiosity, as though he were a novelty. He was an outsider in a world that was so foreign to him, and it felt as though he didn't belong. But he couldn't help but be drawn to the power and prestige of it all. But the glimmer of glamour wore off quickly. Lucas's unease only deepened as he witnessed Rose's behavior in private. She belittled the staff, treated the housekeepers with disdain, and was dismissive of anyone who didn't have the wealth or connections she thought they should. It was as if she saw everyone around her as tools to be used, discarded when they no longer served their purpose. In the few moments they spent alone together, Rose would often tell him how fortunate he was to be in her life. "You're lucky I took you in," she would say, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. There are plenty of others who would kill for this kind of opportunity. Each time she spoke to him like that, Lucas felt smaller, more insignificant. It was as though he were just another possession in her vast collection of material things. But what bothered him even more was the way Rose talked about her own family. Her daughter, Vanessa, seemed to be the only person Rose had any real connection with, but even that bond was strained. Every time Vanessa came to visit, Rose would put on a performance, speaking to her in a voice that was deceptively sweet, but laced with venom. She spoke of Vanessa's failures as a mother, her inability to manage her own finances, and her poor life choices. Lucas would sit there in silence watching this toxic interaction unfold. He was unsure of what to make of it, but deep down, he could feel the weight of the tension in the room. Vanessa would look at him with a sort of silent plea, as if begging him to understand the full extent of what was going on, but Lucas wasn't sure if he was ready to know. One evening, as Lucas was leaving the study, he overheard a conversation between Rose and Vanessa. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words he heard pierced through the walls of his curiosity. "I don't know why you're doing this, Mom." Vanessa's voice was shaking, filled with frustration. "You treat me like I'm some kind of failure. I've tried. I've really tried. I've given you everything, Vanessa. And what have you done with it? You squander everything I give you." Rose's voice was harsh, cold. "I'm the one who has built this empire, and yet you still can't understand what it takes to keep it going. You'll never learn." "I don't want your money, Mom." Vanessa's voice cracked with emotion. "I just want you to see me, to see that I'm doing the best I can. You don't even care about that." The conversation was silent for a moment, and Lucas could almost hear the weight of the years of bitterness between them. It felt like a glimpse into a fractured family, a family that had been torn apart by more than just money. Rose's love had become conditional, measured only by how well her family could serve her needs. There was no room for compassion, no room for anything but her own control. Shaken, Lucas backed away from the door, feeling the sting of what he had just overheard. He couldn't shake the image of Vanessa's tear-streaked face. It was clear that Rose had a way of tearing people down, of making them feel small, insignificant, and somehow Lucas had become one of her victims. The next day, after the conversation replayed in his mind over and over, Lucas tried to distract himself by getting to know the mansion a little better. He walked through the gardens, taking in the beauty that surrounded him, trying to clear his thoughts. But it wasn't long before he was drawn back into Rose's world, a world that was beginning to feel more like a prison. That evening, as Rose made dinner for them both, Lucas tried to avoid her eyes. He didn't want to face her manipulation head-on, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense of discomfort that had been gnawing at him since the first day he arrived. He didn't understand why he had chosen to marry her, why he had allowed himself to be swept away by her promises of luxury. As they sat down to eat, Rose spoke with her usual air of superiority. "You're lucky to be here, Lucas," she said with a cold smile. "Not many people get a chance like this. You should be grateful." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. "I am grateful," he replied, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. "But I don't know if I understand all of this yet." Rose's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by that?" I'm not used to this kind of life," Lucas said, his words faltering. "It's overwhelming. I thought it would be different." Rose's face softened, but there was something unsettling in her gaze. "It's not meant to be comfortable, Lucas. You're here because you need to learn how to fit in. This is the real world, the one that matters. You'd be a fool to turn your back on it." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Lucas truly felt the chains of his decision. This wasn't the life he had dreamed of. It was something else, something darker, more controlling, and he had no idea how to escape it. That night, as Lucas lay in bed, his mind raced. What was he truly caught up in? Rose's world wasn't as glamorous as it appeared. Beneath the surface, there was something sinister lurking, something that threatened to swallow him whole, and yet he couldn't leave. He felt too far in, too entangled in the web she had spun around him. The next morning, as Lucas walked through the mansion, a sense of dread washed over him. The beautiful house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a trap, and the key to his freedom was locked away in a place he wasn't sure he could reach. But one thing was certain, he couldn't keep living in denial. He had to understand the truth, no matter how dark it was. The next few days passed in a blur of luxury and tension. Lucas continued to live in the mansion, but the weight of the situation was beginning to wear on him. The lavish dinners, the elegant surroundings, and the constant flow of expensive gifts couldn't mask the growing discomfort he felt every time he looked at Rose. He had expected his new life to be one of ease, but instead it felt like a carefully designed trap. And Rose was the puppeteer. It wasn't just the way she treated people that bothered him, it was the subtle manipulations, the constant reminders that he was lucky to be in her presence. Rose's praise was never without a hidden agenda, as if she were trying to control him with kindness, making him feel like he owed her everything. It was suffocating, and Lucas felt the walls closing in around him with every passing day. On the morning of the 7th day, Rose's behavior shifted even further. Lucas had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen when Rose called him into the living room. She was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at him. "Sit down, Lucas," she said, her voice as cold as ever. "I need to talk to you about something important." Lucas hesitated but sat across from her, his heart pounding in his chest. What now? He could feel the tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. "Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You've been here for a week now," Rose said, her tone calculating. "I've been watching you, seeing how you're adjusting to the life I've given you, and honestly, I'm not impressed." Lucas's stomach churned. He had done everything she asked, tried to fit in, tried to be the perfect husband to her, but no matter what he did, it was never enough. "I'm trying my best," he replied quietly, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Trying?" Rose scoffed, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "You're not trying, Lucas, you're failing. You think you can just waltz into my life and take advantage of my wealth? You think you deserve this life." She leaned forward, her voice low and menacing. "You don't deserve anything." Her words cut through him like a knife, and he fought to keep his composure. But the truth was, he didn't know if he deserved any of this. He was only here because of his desperation, because he had nothing else to turn to. But now the truth was settling in, and it was far darker than he had ever imagined. "Maybe I don't," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but you made it seem like I did. You said—" "Don't you dare blame me for your mistakes," Rose interrupted, her eyes flashing with anger. "I gave you a chance, but you'll never be good enough for this life. You'll always be a poor, pathetic boy trying to play in a world that's not meant for people like you." The sting of her words was unbearable, but Lucas couldn't show weakness. He had already shown too much. Instead, he stood up abruptly, turning his back on her. "I need some air," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. As he stepped outside into the massive garden, the reality of his situation hit him with full force. He was trapped. He had sold his soul for the promise of a better life, but what he had gotten in return was a cruel and cold existence. He was nothing more than a pawn in Rose's game, a trophy to be displayed when it suited her. The life he had dreamed of was slipping through his fingers, replaced by a nightmare he couldn't escape. Lucas wandered aimlessly around the garden, trying to calm his racing thoughts. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He needed answers. He needed to understand what he had gotten himself into. But how could he confront Rose? How could he fight back against the woman who had all the power, all the control? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to find Vanessa standing in the doorway of the mansion, watching him with a mix of concern and suspicion in her eyes. "Lucas," she called softly, "can I talk to you?" He froze, unsure of what to say. Vanessa had always seemed distant, but there was something about her that made Lucas feel like she understood more than she let on. She wasn't as blind to Rose's manipulation as he had first thought. "What's going on?" Vanessa asked, her voice quiet but insistent. "You've been acting strange ever since you got here. Something's not right, I can tell." Lucas hesitated, unsure of how much he should reveal. He didn't want to drag Vanessa into this. She was already caught in her own struggle with Rose. But at that moment, something in him snapped. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "She's not who she seems to be," Lucas said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "I don't know what I was expecting, but this isn't it. She's controlling, manipulative, and I don't know how much longer I can take it." Vanessa's face softened with empathy, but there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke volumes. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I know," she whispered. "I've been trying to tell you for days, but you're in too deep, Lucas. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Lucas's heart raced as he searched her face for answers. "What do you mean?" he asked, barely able to keep the desperation from his voice. "What's really going on with her?" Vanessa hesitated, looking over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "I don't know everything," she said finally, "but I've seen enough to know that my mom isn't just some lonely old woman looking for company. There's something much darker underneath all of this. I don't know how she's made her money, but I have a feeling it's not through honest means." Lucas's stomach twisted. He had suspected something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed by Vanessa sent a wave of panic through him. He had to know more. He had to understand what he was dealing with. "Do you think she's involved in something illegal?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa looked around nervously before nodding slowly. "I can't prove anything, but I think you're right to be worried. Just be careful, Lucas. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep you safe from her." Her words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He had known, deep down, that Rose was dangerous, but hearing Vanessa's confirmation made the truth all the more real. He was trapped in a house of lies, surrounded by a family that was just as broken as the woman who had brought him here. And now there was no turning back. As Lucas stood there, staring at the manicured lawn beneath his feet, he realized that he had to make a choice. He could continue living in this gilded cage, pretending that everything was fine, or he could find a way out. But if he wanted to escape, he would have to face the dark secrets that Rose was hiding, secrets that could destroy everything. The question was, did he have the courage to expose them? The next few days were a blur of confusion and unease. Lucas could no longer pretend that everything was fine. The truth that he had suspected all along now loomed over him, crushing him with its weight. Vanessa's words echoed in his mind. "You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." But what exactly had he gotten into? He couldn't shake the feeling that the life he had once dreamed of was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. Rose's manipulations, her coldness, the way she spoke to her family, it was all part of something much darker than he had imagined. Lucas couldn't ignore it anymore. He had to understand the full extent of what Rose was involved in, and to do that, he knew he needed to dig deeper. But how? Rose had always been one step ahead of him. She kept a tight grip on every aspect of his life, from his social calendar to the things he saw and heard. How could he uncover the truth without tipping her off? The more he thought about it, the more desperate he became. He couldn't stay silent, not when he knew there were children out there suffering. He had to do something, even if it meant risking everything. But he was alone in this. Vanessa had given him a hint, but she wasn't in a position to help him. She was as trapped as he was. If anything, her warnings had only made him more aware of how dangerous the situation was. The opportunity to act came sooner than he expected. One evening, Rose invited him to a meeting with her lawyer, Mr. Harris, a sleek, well-dressed man who had an air of smugness about him. Rose had been working on some business arrangements that Lucas knew nothing about, and she was eager to bring him into the fold. She had always told him he was a part of her life now, their partner in all things. But Lucas had learned the hard way that being her partner meant being at her mercy. As they sat in the luxurious office overlooking the city, Mr. Harris outlined the details of a new deal Rose was involved in. Lucas listened, trying to hide his growing discomfort. The more Mr. Harris spoke, the more it became clear that Rose's wealth wasn't just the result of savvy investments and inheritance. No, it was much darker than that. "We've secured new contracts," Mr. Harris said, his voice calm and calculated. "These will bring in substantial revenue. Everything is in place. Rose is at the top of the game, and we need to make sure it stays that way." Lucas nodded absently, not really hearing the words. He was too focused on something else. In the corner of the office, hidden behind a stack of papers, he noticed a folder marked "Confidential." It was slightly ajar, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw the name Eagle Enterprises printed on the front. He had never heard of it before, but the sight of it felt wrong. He had to know what was inside. The folder was just within reach. His hand trembled as he considered the risks, but the desire to know the truth was too strong to ignore. While Rose and Mr. Harris continued their conversation, Lucas slowly slid the folder closer to him, trying not to attract attention. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but whatever it was, it couldn't be good. When he finally opened the folder, his eyes went wide as he scanned the papers inside. What he saw made his stomach twist in horror. The contracts were not for legitimate business deals or investments. They were for factories, facilities in foreign countries where children were listed as workers. The contracts were signed by Rose and her associates, and they outlined the terms of labor for what appeared to be minors. It was a network of exploitation, a hidden empire that thrived on the backs of vulnerable children. The realization hit Lucas like a sledgehammer. Rose wasn't just rich, she was profiting from the suffering of innocent lives. His hands shook as he carefully put the papers back into the folder, trying to keep his composure. The room around him seemed to close in. He felt dizzy, his mind racing. How could this be happening? How had he gotten involved with someone so evil? "What's the matter, Lucas?" Rose's voice snapped him out of his trance. He looked up to find her watching him closely, her cold eyes piercing through him. She had noticed his distraction, and in that moment, he knew that she knew exactly what he had seen. I'm fine," Lucas muttered, trying to regain his composure. "Just a lot to take in." Rose didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press him further. Instead, she turned her attention back to Mr. Harris. Lucas could feel her eyes lingering on him, sharp and calculating, as if she were waiting for him to make a move. The tension in the room was palpable, and Lucas was certain she had already figured out what he was up to. He had to be careful. If he made one wrong move, everything would fall apart. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Lucas barely heard the details of the so-called business deal. All he could think about were the papers, the children, the horrific truth that he had uncovered. How could he expose Rose without putting himself in danger? He needed more evidence, something concrete that would bring her down, but he had to move quickly. The longer he stayed in her world, the more he felt himself being suffocated by it. As the meeting ended and they left the office, Rose leaned in close to him. Her breath was warm against his ear, and her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I know what you were looking at," she said softly, the words sending a chill down his spine. "You think you can outsmart me, but you can't. You're mine now, Lucas, don't forget that." Lucas's heart raced, but he said nothing. He knew he was trapped. Rose had him exactly where she wanted him, and the only way out was to expose her for who she really was. But the danger was real. If he made one wrong move, everything, his life, his freedom, could be taken from him in an instant. As he left the mansion that night, his mind was swirling with conflicting thoughts. Rose was dangerous, but he couldn't let her get away with this. He had to expose her, no matter the cost. The question was, how far was he willing to go to destroy the empire she had built on the backs of innocent children? And how far would she go to protect her dark secrets? Lucas couldn't sleep that night. The mansion, with its towering walls and gleaming floors, felt more like a prison now than a palace. The documents he'd seen in Rose's lawyer's office haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words labor contracts and the names of the children. He could still feel the sting of betrayal and the cold weight of the truth. How could he have been so blind? How had he not seen it earlier? The next morning he woke with a gnawing sense of urgency. He knew that everything had changed. Rose wasn't just some cold, controlling woman. She was a criminal, and he had to stop her before it was too late. He spent the day in a daze, wandering the mansion aimlessly. He knew he couldn't confront Rose directly yet. She was too powerful, too manipulative. If he acted too quickly, she would destroy him, just like she had destroyed every person in her life. He needed a plan, a way to expose her without giving her the chance to silence him first. As evening approached, Lucas found himself sitting on the back patio, his thoughts racing. He had a decision to make. There was no turning back now. If he wanted to bring Rose down, he needed help. But who could he trust? He couldn't go to the police, not yet. He had no evidence, just a folder full of contracts and the word of a woman who could easily discredit him. The answer came to him suddenly. Jack, the journalist he had met a few months ago, could help. Jack was persistent, resourceful, and most importantly, he had connections. If anyone could help Lucas gather the evidence he needed and expose Rose, it was him. With his heart pounding, Lucas grabbed his phone and dialed Jack's number. The phone rang once, twice, then Jack answered. "Lucas, is everything okay?" Jack's voice sounded concerned. "I need your help," Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's about Rose. I've seen something, and I can't ignore it anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Jack spoke, his tone shifting to something more serious. "What have you found?" "I can't explain everything over the phone, but I know enough now to say that Rose isn't who she seems. She's involved in something illegal, something that... It involves children. She's exploiting them, Jack." There was silence for a moment. Lucas could hear the sound of Jack taking a deep breath. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Lucas replied. "I've seen the documents. It's all real. I need your help to expose her." "All right, I'll help," Jack said. "Jack," his voice calm but determined. "But you have to be careful, Lucas. If Rose finds out what you're doing, you could be in danger." "I know," Lucas said, his voice shaky. "But I can't just sit here and do nothing. I need to stop her." Jack's voice softened. "I'll gather the resources I need. Just stay safe. Okay?" "I will," Lucas promised. "Thank you." After hanging up, Lucas felt a slight sense of relief. Jack had agreed to help. Now he just needed to keep his wits about him. Rose was dangerous, and the deeper he dug, the more he felt like he was falling into a trap that he couldn't escape. The next few days were a blur. Lucas kept a low profile, trying to avoid Rose's prying eyes. He began gathering everything he could, documents, files, anything that might help Jack build a case against Rose. But the deeper he went, the more he uncovered, and what he found chilled him to the bone. There were reports of children disappearing from factories overseas. There were fake documents, fraudulent signatures, and accounts linked to shady offshore companies. All roads led back to Rose. But Rose was always one step ahead. He could feel her watching him more closely now. He caught her lingering in the hallway one afternoon as he passed, her gaze cold and piercing. It was as though she knew what he was doing, but was waiting for him to make a move. The tension between them had become unbearable. It was then that Lucas realized something even more terrifying. Rose wasn't just controlling him. She was controlling everyone. The mansion, the staff, the family. Everything was a carefully orchestrated show. No one was allowed to think for themselves. No one was allowed to question her. Her power ran deeper than he had ever imagined, and the more he uncovered, the more he understood the full extent of her influence. On the fifth night after his conversation with Jack, Lucas found himself standing in front of the grand staircase, staring up at the large portrait of Rose that hung above the fireplace. It was an imposing image. Rose in her prime, surrounded by opulence, her expression one of cold superiority. But now, as he stood there, it felt different. The woman in the portrait wasn't a queen. She was a tyrant, and Lucas had become one of her prisoners. As if on cue, Rose entered the room. She was always watching, always waiting. Her presence seemed to fill the entire space. "You're looking at that portrait like it's going to give you answers," she said softly, her voice dripping with mockery. "It won't. You can't escape me, Lucas." His heart thudded in his chest as she approached. Her cold eyes locked with his, and for a brief moment he felt as if she could see right through him, as if she knew everything he had been planning. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lucas said, his voice shaking slightly. He had to be careful. If she suspected anything, everything would be over. Rose's lips curved into a cruel smile. "You're lying, I can tell, but go ahead, keep digging. It won't change anything. I always get what I want." Her words sent a chill down his spine. She knew, and worse, she was playing with him like a puppet. Lucas felt trapped, suffocated by her presence, by the weight of his own choices. He had to act, and he had to act soon. The walls were closing in, and if he didn't move quickly, Rose would have the power to destroy him and anyone who tried to help him. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind raced. Jack was waiting for him to make the next move. He had promised to help, but Lucas knew it would come at a cost. This was no longer about money or status. It was about justice, and if he wanted to bring Rose down, he had to risk everything. He couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth had to come out, no matter what it took. But as the night stretched on, one thought kept running through his mind. Could he survive what was coming? The days that followed felt like an endless race against time. Lucas could no longer pretend he was simply a man caught in a web of lies. He was a man running for his life. Each time he glanced at Rose, her cold, calculating gaze seemed to pierce through him, as though she could read his every thought. The mansion, with its elegant furnishings and lavish decor, now felt like a suffocating cage. He was trapped, and the key to his freedom lay in the evidence he had gathered. Evidence that could bring down everything Rose had built, but only if he could get it into the right hands. The next step was critical. He couldn't do this alone. Jack had already warned him. Things would get worse before they got better, and Lucas knew it. If he wanted to take down Rose, he had to be prepared for the fallout. But nothing could have prepared him for the weight of what was coming. On the 6th night since his conversation with Jack, Lucas felt the tension in the air grow thicker. He had been secretly collecting files, receipts, and any trace of evidence he could find that connected Rose to the network of exploitation. The papers were now hidden in a folder under his bed, kept out of sight from Rose's ever-watchful eyes. He couldn't afford to be careless now. That evening, as he was about to retreat to his room, Rose called him into the grand sitting room. She was sitting in her usual spot by the fireplace, her eyes flickering with that unsettling glint. A soft smile tugged at the corners of her lips, but Lucas wasn't fooled. He could feel the trap closing in. "Lucas," she said, her voice as smooth as silk, "come sit with me." He hesitated, but there was no way out. He had to face her, had to keep up the charade just a little longer. Stepping into the room, he kept his expression neutral, trying to hide the turmoil inside. "What is it?" he asked, his voice flat, betraying nothing of his inner anxiety. "Why so distant lately?" she asked, her tone deceptively sweet. "You've been quiet, unfocused. I thought we were getting along so well." Lucas met her gaze, forcing a small smile. "I'm just tired, that's all." Rose didn't seem convinced. "You don't look tired. You look distracted. Is something on your mind?" He couldn't help but feel the weight of her scrutiny. Every word, every action was an attempt to control him, and in that moment, Lucas realized just how deeply Rose had embedded herself into his life. She was a puppet master pulling the strings, and he had allowed himself to be caught in her tangled web. "I'm fine," he said again, trying to sound convincing, but Rose wasn't having it. Her smile widened and she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she examined him. "I know when something's wrong with you, Lucas. I've been doing this for a long time. And right now I can tell you're hiding something." Lucas froze. His heart pounded in his chest. Had she figured it out? Did she know about the evidence? "I'm not hiding anything," he said, his voice strained, but trying to keep it steady. Rose's lips curled into a knowing smile, one that sent a chill down his spine. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, the words heavy with meaning. "Because I think you are." The silence in the room stretched on, thick with tension. Rose's gaze never left his face, and it was clear that she was trying to break him, to make him reveal what he was planning. Lucas clenched his fists, trying to control his breathing. He couldn't give in now, he couldn't let her know. "Rose," he said, his voice shaking slightly but determined, "I'm not hiding anything from you. I've just been thinking about what you said before, about how lucky I am to be here." Her expression softened, but only slightly. "That's good, Lucas. You're beginning to understand your place." Her words were a reminder of how completely she had dominated him, how she had manipulated him into believing he owed her everything. But Lucas couldn't back down now. He had made a choice, and he had to see it through. "I do understand," he said, his voice steadying, "and I'm grateful, but I'm still not sure what I'm supposed to be doing here exactly. I don't know what it is you expect from me." Rose leaned back in her chair, studying him with a bemused expression. "You don't need to understand everything right now, Lucas. All you need to do is trust me." Trust her. That was it. She wanted his complete submission, his blind loyalty, and for a moment Lucas almost felt like he might give in. But then he thought of the children, the horror he had uncovered. He couldn't trust her, not anymore. "I do trust you," Lucas said, the words slipping out without thinking. "But I also need to make my own decisions." Rose's smile faded, and for a brief second Lucas saw something flicker in her eyes, something cold, something dangerous. The atmosphere in the room shifted, and Lucas knew that this conversation was far from over. "Make your own decisions," Rose repeated. "Rose," her voice low and almost mocking, "you're still so naive, Lucas. You think you have choices, but in my world there's only one choice that matters, and that's the one I give you." A chill ran down his spine. He had seen the ruthless side of Rose before, but this was different. This wasn't just manipulation, it was a warning. She was telling him that she controlled everything. His choices, his future, his life, all of it was in her hands. Before he could respond, Rose stood up, walking slowly toward him. "You may think you're being clever, But you're not fooling anyone. You're already mine, Lucas, and you always will be. She stopped just inches from him, and for the briefest moment, he thought she might do something drastic, something that would end everything right there. But instead, she simply placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "I'll be watching." As she turned to walk away, Lucas's heart raced. He had no idea how much longer he could keep up this charade. The walls were closing in and he had to act fast. But Rose was right about one thing. His life as he knew it was no longer his own. It belonged to her. And the only way out was through the darkness she had carefully crafted. That night as he lay in bed, the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. He couldn't let her control him any longer. He had made a promise to himself and to the innocent lives he was determined to protect. Jack was waiting for him to make his move, and he couldn't let fear stop him now. But the danger was real. Rose had warned him. She knew he was a threat. The question was, how far was she willing to go to protect her secrets, and how far was Lucas willing to go to destroy her? The days stretched out like a never-ending battle, each one growing heavier with the weight of the decisions Lucas had to make. Rose had made her warning clear. She was watching him, waiting for him to slip, to reveal his true intentions, and each time he caught her watching him, those sharp, calculating glances, he felt as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong move away from falling. Lucas spent his days pretending to play along with her game, smiling when he was supposed to, remaining silent when necessary, and avoiding the questions that could lead him into a confrontation he wasn't ready for. But inside, his mind raced, his heart pounded. The folder under his bed, the damning evidence he had gathered, felt heavier with each passing hour. He was running out of time. The truth was he was terrified. Terrified of what Rose might do if she discovered his plans. Terrified of how far she would go to protect her secrets. She wasn't just an ordinary woman. She was a powerful force, capable of destroying anyone who stood in her way. And Lucas was no longer just a pawn in her game. He was now the target. The weight of the evidence he had gathered grew more pressing with every hour he spent in the mansion. The lives of those children, the exploitation that Rose had orchestrated, it was all too much. He couldn't just sit idly by and let her continue. The knowledge that he could stop her, that he could bring everything down, was both a burden and a responsibility he couldn't ignore. But how could he get the evidence into the right hands? How could he expose Rose without risking his life? Every path he considered led to a dead end. There was no safe way to do this. No simple solution. Rose had too much control, too many resources. He needed help. That afternoon, after spending hours pacing around the mansion, Lucas made a decision. He called Jack. His heart beat faster with each ring of the phone, as if he were about to jump into the unknown. "Lucas," Jack answered on the second ring, his voice filled with concern. "Is everything okay?" "No," Lucas said, his voice tight. "I need to meet you. Now. I've got everything I need to bring her down, but I can't do it alone." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sigh. "Where are you?" Lucas quickly gave him the address of a small, secluded cafe near the mansion. It was a place he knew Rose wouldn't visit, a place that felt safe, away from the prying eyes of the rich and powerful world she controlled. "I'll be there in an hour," Jack said, his voice resolute. "But you need to be careful, Lucas. If Rose finds out—" "I know," Lucas interrupted, his voice sharp with determination. "I'm done being careful. I've got everything we need. This ends now." He hung up, feeling the weight of his words settle over him. He wasn't sure what would happen after this meeting. He didn't know if Jack could help him, if they could expose Rose without her tearing them apart. But he had no choice. This was the only way forward. As he made his way to the cafe, every step felt like a leap into the unknown. The mansion, with its grand walls and elegant furnishings, felt miles away. He was leaving behind the cage that had held him captive, stepping into the uncertain world of truth and exposure. He had no idea what would happen once he confronted Rose, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't live with himself if he didn't do this. When he arrived at the cafe, he saw Jack sitting at a corner table, a large cup of coffee in front of him. Jack looked up as Lucas approached, his expression serious but determined. "So you look like you've been through hell," Jack said quietly, standing up to shake Lucas's hand. "I feel like I have," Lucas replied, his voice weary. He sat down across from Jack, glancing around nervously. "I've got the evidence, everything we need to bring her down." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What kind of evidence?" Lucas took a deep breath and pulled out the folder from his bag, placing it on the table between them. The papers were neatly organized, every piece of evidence he had gathered laid out for Jack to see. There were contracts, receipts, fake documents, and everything in between. It was more than enough to expose Rose for the criminal she was. Jack flipped through the papers quickly, his eyes scanning each document with growing disbelief. "This is—" He stopped, his voice trailing off as he processed the information. "This is huge, Lucas. You're sitting on a goldmine. If we get this into the right hands—" "We will," Lucas interrupted, his voice steady. "I've been in this mansion long enough to know that Rose won't let anything get in her way. But now we've got the leverage. The police won't be able to ignore this." Jack's eyes met Lucas's, a look of understanding passing between them. "This could ruin her. It could destroy everything she's built. But we have to be careful. We're dealing with someone who has power. Power we can't even begin to comprehend. If we do this, there's no going back." Lucas nodded, his jaw clenched. "I know, but I can't just sit back and let her keep doing what she's doing. People's lives are at stake." Jack closed the folder slowly, his eyes never leaving Lucas's. "All right, we'll make a plan, but you have to promise me that you'll be ready for the fallout. Rose won't go down without a fight, and you'll be the one she'll target." "I'm ready," Lucas said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I have to be." They spent the next hour strategizing, Jack outlining a plan to safely get the evidence to the authorities without tipping off Rose. They would need to act quickly, and they would need to be precise. One misstep, and everything could be lost. As they wrapped up their meeting, Jack stood up, shaking Lucas's hand one last time. "I'll get the ball rolling. You just focus on keeping your head down. The next few days are going to be critical." Lucas stood as well, his mind spinning with the magnitude of what was about to happen. He was one step closer to ending Rose's reign of terror, but he knew that the danger was far from over. This was only the beginning. As Lucas walked back to the mansion that night, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his chest. He had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. There was no going back now. The battle was about to begin, and Lucas had no idea how it would end. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let Rose win. Not this time. The days after his meeting with Jack felt like a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Lucas had handed over the folder containing the damning evidence, but the weight of the situation only grew heavier. He had made the decision to expose Rose, but now the stakes were higher than ever. Every moment that passed felt like a countdown, a ticking clock with no way to stop it. Lucas spent the next few days carefully keeping a low profile, trying to avoid Rose's piercing gaze, but he could feel her watching him more closely than ever, as if she were waiting for him to slip. And he was sure that, deep down, she knew something was coming. She wasn't just the calculating woman he had married. She was a predator, and Lucas was her prey. Despite the tension, he couldn't back out now. Jack had already started putting the wheels in motion. The police were being contacted, a discreet investigation was underway, and a plan was forming to expose Rose's empire. But Lucas knew it wouldn't be easy. She was powerful, ruthless, and she had the resources to destroy anyone who threatened her. The last thing he expected was for Rose to confront him in such a direct way. One evening after dinner, Rose called him into her study. The heavy wooden door creaked shut behind him as he stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the fireplace crackling in the corner. Rose sat behind her desk, her fingers steepled together, watching him with that unnerving calm. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, her eyes searching for any sign of weakness. "Sit down, Lucas," she said finally, her voice low, almost soothing. "We need to talk." His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his face neutral, his body stiff. He had to remain calm or else she would see through him. "About what?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Rose leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping gently on the desk. "You've been acting strange lately, and I don't like it. You've been distracted, quiet. I've been wondering if I've made a mistake." Lucas swallowed, his mind racing. What was she getting at? He couldn't afford to show any signs of panic. He needed to keep his composure. "I don't know what you mean," he said, keeping his tone even. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Oh, I think you do. You've been digging, haven't you? Trying to find something. You think you're so clever, but you're not fooling me. I know what you're up to." His blood ran cold. She knew. She had to know. Everything he had worked so hard to keep hidden was now exposed. But he couldn't let her see that he was rattled. He had to stay strong. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lucas said, his voice a little firmer this time, though his stomach churned with fear. "I'm just adjusting, trying to get used to everything. But it's been a lot. I'm not used to this life." Rose's lips parted. And for a moment, Lucas thought she was going to laugh, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. "Don't lie to me, Lucas," she said, her voice quiet but deadly. "I know you've been snooping. I know you've been looking into my business, into the things I've built. You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've worked for? You think you can take me down?" Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected this direct confrontation. His mind raced, but he couldn't think fast enough. She was too sharp, Too dangerous. I don't want to destroy anything, he said quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. I don't understand all of this. I don't understand how things work around here, but I never meant to upset you. Rose's eyes never left his face, and for a moment he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall. But she didn't speak for a long time, just studied him with that terrifying calm. Finally, she spoke again. You're lying to me, Lucas. I can see it in your eyes. You think I don't know what's going on in my own house? I've been in this world for far too long to be fooled by a naive little boy like you. Lucas's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. But Rose wasn't finished. You've been trying to play both sides. You think I don't know about the files you've been collecting? About the phone calls you've been making? She leaned forward even further, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think I won't destroy you if you cross me? Lucas stood frozen, his mind whirling. And he had underestimated Rose. She had been watching him every step of the way. She knew everything, the files, the phone calls, the meetings with Jack. She knew it all. And now she was going to make him pay for his disobedience. He had no choice now. He had been caught. The truth was out. But there was one thing he had learned in the past few days. Rose was powerful, yes, but so was he. He wasn't the naive young man who had walked into this house months ago. He had seen her for what she truly was, and he wasn't going to let her control him anymore. I'm not afraid of you, Lucas said, his voice trembling but determined. He stepped forward, meeting her gaze. You can't keep hiding behind your power forever. The truth will come out, Rose. You can't stop it. For the first time, something flickered in Rose's eyes, a flash of uncertainty, quickly masked by her cold composure. But Lucas had seen it. She was rattled. You think you're so clever, she sneered, standing up from behind the desk. But you have no idea what you're up against. You've already made your move. Now you'll suffer the consequences. Lucas didn't respond. He couldn't. The battle had begun. Rose knew his plan, and she was going to do everything in her power to stop him, but he had already made up his mind. There was no turning back. As Rose moved toward him, her hands clenched into fists, Lucas felt the weight of the moment settle in. He had done it. He had crossed a line, and now there was no way to escape the storm that was coming. But he was ready to fight, ready to bring her down. And the truth, no matter how dangerous, would be revealed. The question was, would he survive long enough to see it happen? The confrontation with Rose left Lucas feeling like the ground beneath him had disappeared. His mind spun, racing with thoughts of what came next. For a fleeting moment he had the terrifying realization that Rose was right. He had no idea what he was truly up against. She was a master manipulator, a woman who had built an empire on control and fear, and now in her eyes he was nothing more than a pawn to be discarded. But as the days passed, Lucas didn't falter. If anything, the knowledge that Rose knew everything fueled his determination. He couldn't back down now. He couldn't let her win. Not when he was so close to bringing her down. The tension in the mansion was unbearable. Lucas could feel it in every conversation, every glance Rose cast in his direction. It was as if she were watching him constantly, waiting for him to slip up, to make one mistake. But Lucas wasn't going to make it easy for her. He knew that exposing Rose was no longer just about gathering evidence. It was about surviving long enough to make sure that evidence reached the right hands. For the next few days, he stayed under the radar. He kept his interactions with Rose as brief as possible, making sure to stay on her good side while continuing to work behind the scenes. Jack had assured him that the authorities were moving, but they needed more time. The moment Rose realized what was happening, the consequences could be catastrophic. The air in the mansion grew thicker, more oppressive. The house that had once seemed like a luxurious dream now felt like a prison. And the worst part was, Lucas had no idea how much longer he could keep pretending. The walls felt like they were closing in, and every step he took seemed to bring him closer to a precipice he couldn't avoid. Then came the phone call that would change everything. It was early one morning when Lucas received a call from Jack. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. Lucas, Jack said, his voice tense, I need you to listen carefully. We've got a lead on Rose's operations. The investigation is moving forward, but we need to act fast. If we don't strike soon, she'll get away with everything. The evidence you've gathered, it's crucial. But there's a problem. Rose has connections everywhere, and she's already making moves. We think she's trying to silence you. Lucas's stomach dropped. What do you mean, silence me? He asked, his voice low. I'm talking about your safety, Lucas, Jack replied urgently. We've got to get you out of there before she figures out what you're doing. She knows too much. The longer you stay, the more danger you're in. We don't have much time. The urgency in Jack's voice sent a jolt of panic through Lucas. He had always known this was risky, but he hadn't realized just how much danger he was truly in. Rose wasn't just a woman to be outsmarted. She was a criminal mastermind, and he was her primary target. "I can't just leave," Lucas said, his mind racing. "There's no way out. I'm too deep. I can't abandon everything now." "I know it's hard, but you have to think about your life," Jack insisted. "We need to get the evidence to the right people. And for that, we need you safe. Rose won't hesitate to destroy you if she feels threatened." Lucas felt a wave of dread wash over him. He had come this far. How could he leave now, with everything so close to falling apart? But Jack was right. If Rose knew what he was planning, he would be risking more than just his life. He would be risking everyone who was trying to help him. "I'll figure something out," Lucas said, his voice heavy with resolve. "But I can't run, not yet." Jack's voice softened. "Just be careful, Lucas. You're playing with fire." The call ended, leaving Lucas to stare at the phone, his mind racing. He was trapped. Rose's power was suffocating, and he knew he couldn't keep playing this game forever. But if he left, if he ran now, it would be over. He couldn't just walk away after everything he had seen, everything he had learned. That night, Lucas stood in front of the large mirror in the bedroom, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was no longer the naive student who had entered this world, desperate for an escape. He had changed, hardened, more determined, but also more afraid. His life was no longer his own. He was caught in a dangerous game, and there was no way out without risking everything. He looked over at the desk, where the folder with the evidence sat hidden in the drawer. That was his leverage. That was his chance to make everything right. But how long could he keep it hidden? How long before Rose found out, before she made her move? Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Lucas froze, his heart hammering in his chest. It was late, too late for anyone to be checking on him. He opened the door cautiously, his breath catching when he saw who it was. It was Vanessa. She looked panicked, her face pale as she stepped inside quickly, closing the door behind her. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We need to talk. It's not safe here anymore." "What's going on?" Lucas asked, his pulse racing. "What do you mean? Is she—" Vanessa nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Rose knows. She knows you've been trying to take her down. She's been watching everything, every move you make. She's got people everywhere, Lucas. You can't stay here. You have to leave now." A chill ran down his spine as the weight of Vanessa's words sank in. Rose had already figured out what he was doing. She was coming for him, and it was only a matter of time before she would do everything in her power to destroy him. "There's no way out," Lucas said, his voice thick with dread. "I've already made my move. I can't turn back." Vanessa grabbed his arm urgently, her grip tight. "You don't understand, Lucas. She's going to kill you. She'll stop at nothing to protect her empire. You're not just a threat anymore. You're the only thing standing between her and everything she's built." Lucas looked at her, fear and determination warring within him. She was right. If he stayed, if he kept pushing, he might just end up dead. But if he ran, he would never be able to stop Rose. For the first time in his life, he realized there was no middle ground. There was only one choice. "I can't run," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I won't." Vanessa's face hardened. "Then you need to be prepared for the consequences." The storm had arrived, and Lucas was about to face it head-on. The air in the mansion had changed, charged with a dangerous tension, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Lucas couldn't ignore the reality anymore. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that he still had control. Rose was too powerful, too connected, and too ruthless. But for the first time since he had entered her world, Lucas understood that he had nothing left to lose. The truth about Rose had been eating at him, gnawing at him from the inside. He couldn't walk away anymore, even if it meant facing the wrath of the woman who had manipulated and controlled every aspect of his life. This wasn't about wealth or status. This was about justice, about exposing the horrifying truth that Rose had hidden beneath her perfect facade for so long. Vanessa's warning hung heavy in the air, but Lucas wasn't afraid anymore. If this was how it ended, then so be it. But he wasn't going to let Rose get away with it. Not when he had the evidence. Not when he had the chance to bring her empire crashing down. He needed to act quickly. Jack was waiting, and the authorities were just a few steps away from taking Rose down. But Lucas knew that Rose wouldn't just let him walk away. She had already made her move. She had known all along. As Lucas paced the grand hallway of the mansion, his mind raced. Every step felt like a countdown, like the final seconds before everything unraveled. The weight of the decision was heavy on his shoulders. He had chosen a side, and now he had to stand by it. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Rose walking toward him, her presence like a shadow falling over him. She was calm, too calm, as if she already knew the outcome. She stopped in front of him, her eyes piercing into his. "I knew you'd try something like this, Lucas," she said softly, the words almost like a caress. "You think you can bring me down? You think you can expose me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Lucas didn't flinch. He didn't back down. The fear that once held him captive had been replaced with something stronger, resolve. He had come too far to turn back now. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Rose," he said, his voice steady. "I know everything. I know what you've done, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Rose's smile faltered, just for a moment. But then she straightened, her gaze hardening. "You're a fool. Lucas, you think you can just expose me and walk away unscathed? You don't understand the power I have. I've built everything from the ground up, and I'll destroy anyone who tries to take it from me." Lucas stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "You've built this empire on lies, on the suffering of children. You're not untouchable. The truth will come out and it'll be over for you." Her eyes narrowed with cold fury, but she said nothing for a moment. Then, with a sharp gesture, she turned on her heel, her voice cutting through the air. "You don't know what you've started, Lucas. You're playing a dangerous game. You'll regret this." Without another word, she walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. But Lucas didn't move. He didn't feel the same fear he once did. He had done what he came here to do. He had taken a stand. He quickly made his way to the study where the folder with the evidence sat in the drawer. It was time to send everything to Jack. There was no turning back now. But as he reached for the drawer, something caught his eye, a flash of movement from the corner of the room. Lucas turned to find Vanessa standing in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "Lucas, you need to go. Now," she said, her voice shaking. Rose knows what you've been doing. She's already making calls. She's going to have you arrested, or worse." Lucas's heart sank, but he didn't hesitate. "I can't run, Vanessa. Not anymore. It's too late for that." She stepped into the room, her eyes wide with panic. "She's going to destroy you. You need to leave now before it's too late." "I can't," Lucas repeated, his voice calm but resolute. "I've made my choice. I'm not running." Vanessa's face twisted with frustration. "You don't get it. She won't just take you down, Lucas. She'll destroy everyone in her path to protect herself. You're in too deep. You don't have the power to stop her." Lucas shook his head. "I'm not doing this for power, Vanessa. I'm doing it because it's right. You know what she's done. We all know." She hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I know, but I'm telling you, she's going to come for you. You don't stand a chance." "I'm not backing down," Lucas said, his voice firm. "It's time for her to face the consequences." Vanessa stared at him for a long moment, her face a mix of fear and disbelief. Finally, she nodded slowly, a reluctant understanding in her eyes. "You're right. You're already in this too deep. But please, just be careful. Don't let her win." Lucas turned away from her and reached for the drawer again. His hands shook slightly, but there was no time for hesitation. He pulled out the folder and made sure the documents were all in place. It was time to send the evidence to Jack. Just as he prepared to leave the room, there was a loud crash from the hallway. Footsteps echoed through the house, fast, urgent. His heart dropped. Rose. He didn't have much time. He sprinted down the hallway, his mind focused on one thing, getting the evidence to Jack before it was too late. As he reached the front door, he heard Rose's voice, sharp and cold, coming from behind him. "You won't get away with this, Lucas. You can't escape me. I always win." He turned to face her, the final confrontation upon them. Rose stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes dark with fury, her posture regal as ever. But this time, Lucas wasn't afraid. This time, he knew he had the power to change everything. "I'm done running, Rose," Lucas said, his voice steady. "This ends tonight." The air was thick with tension, the final moment of reckoning upon them. Lucas had done it. He had exposed the truth, and no matter what happened next, he knew one thing for certain. The truth was unstoppable. Rose's reign was coming to an end, and for the first time in months, Lucas felt free.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.